Today is the 11th of April 1904, a Monday about 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm on top of a slow-moving horse bus in the Westminster Bridge Road. My name is Bolus and I am a photographer. I'm just introducing part 2 by showing you, through my camera lens, a part of Waterloo at the turn of the century. The traffic along here is always heavy, and it seems even worse since the electric trams came in last year. I prefer the horse buses. They're slower and easier for taking pictures. I'll get down here and take you along York Road. Oh, in case you're baffled by the view, after all there are some 80 years separating us, here's the view from this point in your day. We're in York Road now, near Waterloo Station, and if I turn a little to the right here for another picture, there's the Rising Sun Public House for you, with College Street on the left. I've been shown the same view in the 1980s. Very nice, I'm sure, but I think I'll keep to my own age. My favourite streets around here are the terraces and wharf buildings between York Road and the river. College Street, Belvedere Road, Belvedere Crescent, Tennyson Street. It's much quieter once you're away from the main roads. Just a few children playing on the corner, perhaps the sound of horses' hooves, and of course the songbirds outside so many windows. But don't let me give you the idea it's all a paradise. Behind those clean curtains, life can be pretty hard. Well, there's a taste of a small part of Waterloo, and I'll hand you over now to your historian. If you like, though, come back another time and I'll show you the Belvedere Road area properly.
Mr. Bolus's streets and wharves have long ago been covered by the Shell buildings and County Hall, but there are still some local residents in the 1980s who can just remember them at that time. And down towards Blackfriars Bridge, people can remember the noisy waterfront with its shot towers and rows of Thames barges carrying coal and wood and cement, all replaced now by office blocks and one of the country's largest art centres.
Before hearing what it was like from people who are actually there, let's just set the scene. Part 1 of this tape slideshow described how, by the early 1800s, the pleasure gardens of Lambeth had been overwhelmed by the rapid growth of London as an industrial city and the enormous influx of population from the countryside in search of work. The opening of Waterloo Bridge in 1817 and the laying down of a new road network led to the rapid covering over of the area with cheap speculative housing, industrial workshops and factories. The railways arrived in the middle of the century, cutting through dense streets built only a few decades before. By the end of the century, some of the heavy engineering industry had moved away, but Waterloo was still basically an industrial area, dependent in part on the river transport and a large local workforce. The population in 1901 stood at 113,000, more than 20 times as many as today, and most people still lived in the dense network of back streets and courts constructed so quickly 60 to 80 years before. But what was it like living in a typical street just off Lower Marsh?
I'll tell you the names in the street. The first house was Mrs. Casey. The next house was Mrs. Varnold. Next house was Mrs. Clements, but God knows wherever they all slept. And Wiggy Alice's fifth husband, Curly, who had all the boils when he was laying dead. Then next door to that was Dust Old Kate. Next door to that was Redneck. Next door was Mrs. Pratt. Next door was Mr. Cock. Next door to him Mrs. Hancock. Next door was Mrs. Alcock. Next door was Mrs. Hitchcock. Next door was Mrs. Albright. There was old Mary Ann Redden. Maggie from the Knoll, she was at the top. And then there was Pineapple Ada.
George Dennis lived in Murphy Street before the First War. It was not surprising he knew everyone. For one thing, overcrowding was still bad, commonly 4 or 5 people to a room, so people spent a lot of time out on the street. Families often had 6 to 8 children, and when houses came vacant, sons and daughters, aunts and uncles took over the tenancies, and whole streets became a sort of extended family, often going off on working holidays together to the hop fields of Kent.
When Mr. Fall calls to the rent, tell him we're hopping down in Kent.
Up that end of one street, or it might be half of them, the houses was all relations. See, there was my grandmother, and then there was my mum's sister, Next door to that was my grandmother's brother, and the next door to that was my grandfather's brother, and then there was another relation, I don't know if it was a nephew, and then there was another niece.
If you rented a whole house, you filled it up with lodgers to help pay the rent. Celia Rothwell was one of a family of 15 renting a house in Lambeth Square, just off Lower Marsh.
The family, my brothers and sisters, all slept in the back kitchen, and that was where we all had to sleep, all my brothers and sisters. Now, my mother and father slept up on the first floor in the big room, and on the next room to him, Harry Gibbon, he was one lodger there. We had three up the top. In the back room there was 2. Now, on the first floor, my mother...
Mrs. Whitney had Ivy, Elsie, Violet, Renee, that's 4 girls. Tommy, Patsy, Billy, that's 9. That was the 9. But they were kept wonderfully clean. You know, at that time, their hair went right down to the backsides, but it was spotlessly clean.
Don't have any more, Mrs. Moore. Mrs. Moore, please don't have any more. The more you have, the more you'll want. They say enough is as good as a feast any day. If you have any more, Mrs. Moore, you'll have to take the house next door. They're all right when they're here, but take my advice, oh dear, don't have any more, Mrs. Moore.
I lost my parents when we were young. I used to keep that little old 6-roomed house clean, and believe me, it was hard work. In the front kitchen, where was like a living room, you'd have the old black lead stove, which you were very proud of. You'd black lead that and polish it, make it look bright, and then you had to whiten the hearth. We all had those 3 steps, so you would scrub the wooden step at the top, and you'd whiten these. Used to do the old hearths in the kitchen white, and the steps used to be done with what they used to call grey hearthstone. When my mum used to do the washing, they'd boil the washing in the old copper.
But you had the manual.
Yeah, they used the old rubbing board, and
it was all hard work.
In the days before the First War, the middle classes couldn't think why the poor people of areas like North Lambeth didn't move further out. Accommodation was no more expensive, and work was often easier to find. Apart from strong social and family ties to an area, the truth was that life was so precarious living on about £1 a week per family that you dared not leave friends and neighbours you knew. To do this was to forfeit your insurance against disaster, and men in Lambeth were known to walk 3 hours each way to an 11-hour job rather than move house. George Slayford was lucky. His father had built a small glass bottle factory just off Oakley Street, now called Bayliss Road, and George and 6 of his brothers went straight there from school.
We used to use old milk bottles, glassware, anything, you know, mostly out of the pubs. First of all, you have a long tube. You warm the top and you put it in the glass and get a little tiny bit about the size of your finger on the edge, and then you blow into the middle of it until you get a bubble in the middle, and then you drop it in your mould and you pull your mould up quick and you blow as hard as you can. Well, you had 2 shifts, one at 7 until 6 and the other one 7 at night till 6 in the morning.
The area was full of little workshops like this, engineers, blacksmiths, joiners, wheelwrights. Many things were still done by hand then, although mass production was well underway. But there were also the firms that Waterloo was famous for.
One of the biggest local firms was William Clowes, the printers in Duchy Street. Raines was the theatrical costumier in Waterloo Road, within a stone's throw of the Old Vic, and they supplied theatre wardrobes all over London. And the waterside industries like brewing and lead shop manufacture were still important. But other long-standing firms, particularly the numerous engineering concerns, attracted by cheap land in the 19th century, were outgrowing their premises and moving away.
The beginning of the 20th century saw no decline in the theatrical and variety activity around Waterloo. Quite apart from its own numerous theatres, the Waterloo Road and York Road had become the centre of the business itself, with variety agents of all kinds having their offices there.
Most of the agents' offices are in York Road, and the central point of meeting is the York Hotel at the corner of Waterloo Road. So many pros seeking engagements are to be found inside and on the pavements outside that for many years it's been known as Poverty Junction. As a matter of fact, it's really a sort of exchange and mart for the variety profession. Many a small proprietor will come there and fill up his week's programme to commence that very night.
In Leicester Square, slapping my leg with my cane, letting them know I'm about. I'm only a lad, but I'll finish a bad all through watching the trains go out.
Such a centre for the acting profession did it become that in 1901 Lydia Dreams chose the Waterloo Road as the setting for her famous painting showing over 300 music hall celebrities of the day.
As for its own theatres, Waterloo at this time was perhaps the most famous for the Old Vic and the pioneering activities of Emma Conns and Lillian Bayliss. Unlike their predecessors, they were not interested in fashionable North Bank theatre-goers. Both were ardent temperance campaigners and sought to compete with the local gin palaces for their audiences. In those days the theatre was called the Royal Victoria Hall and Coffee Tavern. Bill Townsend, known to everyone as Townie, was a schoolboy in Exton Street, and at the end of the day he used to sell programmes there, and in 1910 he started work full-time.
You see, I had an uncle, and he was a big friend of Miss Emma Conns, who ran the Vic at that time. She was a very little short woman. You've seen pictures of Queen Victoria? That's Emma Conns. A dead image of her, with the old bonnet tied under here, and all braid and all that. It was very strict, all down with drink, oh dear.
Her niece, Lillian Bayliss, came to help with the theatre in 1898, and in 1912 succeeded her as manager. It was she who recognised the drawing power of the moving pictures.
We used to use, I remember going back, what they called a bioscope. We called it moving pictures. And it used to be held down from the back of the circle. There was a box arrangement with a lantern in it. And the chap in there used to turn the handle. And on the stage was a white screen. And then they give you all kinds of funny pictures and all kinds of things on this screen, you see. That was on a Monday night. Tuesday night became a lecture night and scientific lectures. The one I remember most would be Sir Ernest Shackleton to the South Pole. Then Friday night was a temperance night, with the Brotherhood of the Temperance Society, down with drink and all that. And then Saturday night was the final night of the week, all variety turns, all the rough stuff, you know.
Lillian Bayliss went on to found the Old Vic Shakespeare Company in 1914, and it was she who started up evening classes in the dressing rooms, which later grew so much in popularity that part of the theatre was walled off, and Morley College for working men and women was founded.
The management at the Royal Victoria had to face stiff competition for audiences from the local music halls, the Surrey in Blackfriars Road, and the Canterbury and Gatties in the Westminster Bridge Road.
The Canterbury was a magnificent building. You entered in Westminster Bridge Road and walked along an elaborate hall under the railway viaduct to reach the auditorium on the far side.
It was built in the form of a grotto, you know, as you went in, imitation wood and forest and all this here. And they had fish tanks in the side of the wall, like, you know, and used to have live fish in them, like, you know, as you went down here.
Many famous stars appeared here regularly, but it's the old films and the local talent shows that many local people remember most vividly. Celia Rothwell remembers one as far back as 1910.
Oh, it was lovely, the old Canterbury. Beautiful. I went down to see my Aunt Anne, and she lived just down by the side of the Canterbury. So she said to me, you know, sis, she said, now I'm going to take you to the Canterbury. I want you to sing them a song. Oh, I said, I can't, Aunt Anne. So she said, you're coming along with me. And she took me in. Oh, blimey, I was terribly frightened, you know. But so all at once they said, this little girl, she's not very old, and she's going to sing you a song. And I remember that song to this day. 'Twas the last rose of summer left blooming alone. Her lovely companions are faded and gone. Everybody was singing it, and you know they were so happy. They stood up on their seats. You know they used to in those days. Oh, give us again! Give us another one! Give us another one! Oh, I was so thrilled. I was only 12, you know.
My name's George Stacey, and my uncle was Gunner Moore, and he worked at the Canterbury Theatre for 30 years. He was a terrific man. And the roof, the top was all a glass dome thing, yeah, it's a sea green glass. And of course, when the film started, this rolling horse shutter come right along, then all the old lights would go out.
But the old Gettys was a bit lower, like, you know, because they used to run serials, you see, like Pearl White, the Clutching Hand. Yeah. And they was a silent films, but the kids wasn't silent.
Frank Cowley, who's now in his 80s, remembers playing with his brother at both theatres in one night.
And you double. You play the Canterbury and Gettys, it's only across the road. You're on in 3 minutes, you're on. As soon as you finish, bump, over to the Gettys. Oh, it was lovely in those days. I can't it was lovely. What a business. Oh, the audiences, but mind you, you've got to be good. Because bottles could, and coins could come on the stage, and by God, they were dangerous.
There was one woman who used to come back, like, backwards and forwards. I suppose she used to get about 30 bob for a week's work. She only knew one song, My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. Whenever she come on, all us kids used to shout out, My Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the sea. Is this the only one she knew?
Going there on the free list. Always friends of the copper because they never knew when they wanted to chuck somebody out. Oh no, you had them all in there, not all.
All a very long time ago. Where Gatties stood is now the tarmac and concrete of the Westminster Bridge roundabout. The auditorium of the Canterbury is a lorry park, and the grandiose palace that was once the entrance on Westminster Bridge Road is now just a vacant site. But traces still remain. The bases of the fish tanks in the entrance to the Canterbury are still to be seen, open to the sky and covered with weeds.
I said if I was rich I'd have all that done again as it was. It was beautiful.
The concentration of theatres and the variety profession gave pre-First War Waterloo a special flavour. The place abounded with small hotels and lodging houses, and many local landladies looked to the acting profession for their livelihood.
Mrs. Boscombe, 38 Redmond Street off London Road. Bedrooms, sitting rooms combined. Piano, bath. Convenient for Empire, Olympia and Hippodrome. Highly recommended by Fine and Hurley, Minotti, the Two Coons and other artists. Tram passes door.
Norbury, please. Honey Norbury. Right. Thank you.
The swaying, squeaking, droning electric tram was to become an essential part of the flavour of the London streets for over 50 years, and the first LCC line opened on the Westminster Bridge Road on the 15th of May 1903, with the Prince and Princess of Wales as halfpenny passengers. The scene here was to change drastically before the start of the First World War. The shops along Westminster Bridge Road and on the corner of Belvedere Road in the background were all demolished by 1909, and 2.5 acres of the Thames filled in to make way for the new County Hall, the offices of the London County Council. County Hall heralded the 20th century's spread of office building from the north to the south bank. In fact, when the site was selected, it was intended to lead the way to the general replanning and rebuilding of the south bank.
There were several other important developments before the beginning of the First War. One was the extension of Waterloo Station itself. Commuting to work and travelling of all kinds had greatly increased since the station's first extension in the 1860s, and it was no longer big enough. In 1900 it took in 6.5 acres towards Lower Marsh, swallowing up whole streets, churches and schools. A new approach road was built from Lower Marsh, but as the Railway Gazette said,
"Before any property occupied by the labouring classes could be demolished, provision had to be made for rehousing the occupants."
Campbell buildings were built by the railway for this purpose, and the Lambeth Medical Officer of Health said of them,
"These blocks are really model buildings, and Lambeth has reason to be proud of them."
They may have been advanced for their day, but the rooms were small, and most had no bathrooms.
Elsewhere in the area, the local authority was assisted in clearing away slums by the church commissioners, who pulled down hundreds of dirty, damp and dilapidated houses and built in their place Mitre Road, Short Street and Ufford Street. By 1914, such improvements had helped to reduce the notoriously high death rate in Marsh Ward to somewhere near the average for Lambeth.
The Duchy of Cornwall assisted in the same way by developing streets like Aquinas Street. In the Doon Street area, it cleared some appalling slums to build the Waterloo Hospital, and, in the wake of County Hall, government offices. Smith's printing works went up on the opposite side of Stamford Street a few years later.
In the Waterloo Road, the Union Jack Club for soldiers and sailors was built in a convenient position opposite the railway station. It helped to assure the nearby streets of a fairly spicy street life for the next few decades at least. The hostel was opened by King Edward VII in 1907, the King providing his own money for one of the bedrooms. Within only 7 years, this club and hostel was going to be in very heavy demand.
I was young, I didn't see any danger, I was tough. I was brought up bloody tough, wasn't I? My parents were good, but they were poor, and you had to work. There were 7 of us, kids. Plus when the time came to go to war, I was too bloody eager to go with the rest of the crowd. 17 of us went up to sign on the dotted line and draw the King's shilling.
When Zeppelins come over, that was shocking. When they came over, the police used to come and knock at the door. Take cover, take cover, take the cover. Don't wait, don't wait. Take the kids over the...
Take cover, enemy on the way. Take cover, enemy on the way. Take cover, enemy approaching. Take cover, enemy approaching. Take cover, enemy approaching.
The Tommies used to flood into Waterloo Station on their way home on leave, stopping over at the Union Jack Club and thronging the streets and pubs at night. A favourite haunt was the Tattooist in Waterloo Road, where soldiers and their sweethearts were tattooed by the hundreds.
The streets of Waterloo had been left relatively intact by the time the war came to an end, but the local population had not. Between 1911 and 1921 it was reduced by a quarter, from 100,000 to 75,000, twice the rate of decline before and after the war. The London and South West Railway built an impressive new entrance to Waterloo Station, to the memory of the 250 employees they had lost in the fighting.
Like everywhere else, the people of Waterloo had to pick themselves up and carry on. Working conditions and domestic problems of health and housing were still appalling by today's standards, and there was a great deal to be done.